How far is that palace from the Ministry of Information, this shot we have up now of the mosque and the minaret in Baghdad Central?
It's no more than a couple of miles. I mean, this is all in a particular block, if you like, of West Baghdad. If you head north from the palace, I would say maybe a mile and a half, maybe 2 miles would get you to the Ministry of Information building and the Al Rashid Hotel and the various other landmarks that we seem to be targeted at the moment. And again, the Al Mansour district, where this seeming attack against Saddam Hussein and the Iraqi leadership occurred, is also very close by. So this is all happening in close quarters, again making it even more amazing that Saddam Hussein would risk heading to the Al Mansour district, a district that the United States has targeted before, not just in this campaign, but in previous campaigns, to hold some kind of meeting. It perhaps illustrates that the number of places where he could meet with his advisors was dwindling, and that his ability to communicate with those people was effectively shattered.
Yeah, Simon Marks in Amman describing the situation Saddam Hussein is in, where he cannot get on the phone, he cannot call people to him, he has to go to them and have, in the expression of Tony Soprano, a sit-down. Let me go back to Peter Brooks and Brad Baker. Peter, talk, if you can, for me a little bit about the CIA and special operations that are going on in Baghdad now. We've heard Tommy Franks and others describe them as operating at will, that there are a great number of special operations people, and I suppose that means CIA and others, in Baghdad looking for these leadership individuals, looking for gatherings of them, looking for Saddam Hussein, killing them if they can find them. How does that work? How can we have people in there operating like that without being known, without being caught, just slipping around doing this stuff right under Saddam Hussein's nose?
Well, it's a real challenge, and remember, we're not only going to be using American forces, American Special Operations Forces or CIA operatives, but we may also be using Baghdad or Iraqi agents. You know, people who certainly know the language, will blend in, know the culture, and can move around. And I imagine the first strike on Baghdad a couple of weeks ago was from an informant who was in our stable of agents. So it's going to be a combination of people, but we're going to use every technique possible. We're going to try to blend in. We're trying to keep a low profile. We're going to try to move around at night and not stick out. And these people, so if you have somebody who knows the city, it's especially helpful for getting around. And now as we close in on Baghdad, there's more and more areas in which we can operate, where our special operations forces can. But I mean, these are the best people in the world, some brave and very courageous people that are putting their own lives on the line to get these targets. And remember, once we've gone into conflict, these people who are in command of the forces, even though he's a political leader, Saddam Hussein is a legitimate military target. And once, because he's not only the president of the country, but he's also the commander-in-chief. So he is a legitimate target. This is not considered to be a political assassination in this case.
All right, Peter and Brad, just stand by a second. Let me go to William Lajeunesse in Kuwait City, who has a little information to contribute to the situation with tonight's 4 JDAM bunker buster attack on this restaurant where Saddam Hussein might have been. William, can you hear me?
Yeah, good morning, John. Indeed, just 2 things. Number one, I was just looking at the latest AP write-through on this, and they're saying that 3 buildings were actually destroyed. That they're saying rescue workers looking in the rubble have recovered 2 bodies. That's all. They said the number could be as high as 14. I have no idea where they get that kind of a figure. Obviously, this heap of concrete, mangled iron, shredded furniture, and clothing, they say. One interesting thing I thought was, you know, back in 1996, there was a coup attempt against Saddam Hussein, and everyone's always said, well, listen, you know, he has all these very loyal people around him, and they can never be bought off. Well, in fact, 120 people were executed in that coup attempt, including members of the Special Republican Guard and his own personal staff. They were all Sunni Muslims, some even from his hometown of Tikrit, as well as Mosul and Baghdad. So this idea that somehow he had this impenetrable special guard around him and only his most loyal people is a little bit of a fallacy. They can be and at least in that time, were bought off. Secondly, Saddam himself has said he had many, many enemies. In fact, one man came to him once and said, you know, I'm upset because you killed my family for no reason. And Saddam said, basically, get in line, pal. By the time you get to me, there'll be no flesh left on the bones. Two other notes. We have been monitoring Abu Dhabi television as well as Al Jazeera. Abu Dhabi only simply is saying in their audio track, they came here to liberate us. Why would they want to bomb us? They're making no notation that Saddam Hussein may have been a target in that pile. Secondly, Al Jazeera only began reporting this about 45 minutes ago and only in its crawl, even though we've been reporting this for a good hour and a half. And finally, John, one other thing. You know, if indeed he was there meeting with 30, 40 of his inner circle and top government officials, even if he survived, there is no government left. We said we ruined their command and control. Well, now there's no one actually to give the commands. It's kind of interesting. So, and I have been reading a little bit about that bunker situation. It's unclear yet whether or not there was a bunker under this restaurant connected by tunnels, or were we talking about a palace, which do have some very effective bunkers going, you know, designed after those with Marshal Tito and so forth, with 4,000 tons of concrete as a roof. It's at this point in time unclear. But if this indeed was a restaurant, it doesn't sound like there might be a bunker underneath.
William Lajeunesse in Kuwait City. William, thank you very much. Let me go back to the Pentagon now. Brett Baer has been working the story very, very hard. Of course, we're trying to figure out if Saddam Hussein was in that restaurant in the Al Mansour district that was targeted by 4 2,000-pound bombs. Brett, anything new?
Well, just a growing sense, a growing confidence that officials say that they believed that Saddam Hussein was in that particular spot when that strike was called in. Again, a close air support situation with a B-1 bomber dropping 4 2,000-pound bunker busters on that particular site. And we're seeing what remains of it, this video shown on Abu Dhabi TV earlier today. Now, it's interesting that William was talking about what's left as far as the leadership. Understand that this happened at 3 o'clock in the afternoon Baghdad time, which means 7 in the morning here on the East Coast. Now, we had a Pentagon briefing at roughly 2 in the afternoon when Defense Secretary Rumsfeld and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Richard Myers, came out, gave the update on Operation Iraqi Freedom, and also talked about Saddam Hussein. Now, given what we know now about what happened at that particular time, Secretary Rumsfeld would already have known that this strike took place, would likely have been getting intelligence reports about the possibility of Saddam Hussein not being around. And take a listen. It's interesting looking back now at what he said this afternoon at this Pentagon briefing.
The regime's leaders are increasingly isolated. The circle is closing, and their options are running out. As his regime collapses around him, the question is asked, where is he? There are 3 possibilities. He's either dead or injured or not willing to show himself.
Now, this obviously was in the afternoon, our time. He went on to say that no matter what happens, eventually there will be a point where it is irrelevant what Saddam Hussein's fate actually is. Coalition troops will have secured Baghdad, and then the rest of the country will come around knowing that the regime is no longer in place. That was his opening statement there. It's just interesting to listen back at it, knowing that he would have known by that point 4 hours after this strike took place.
Yeah, and you know, we always look at Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld to try to read the knitted brow as to what it might mean. It did seem that he showed a card or two, although not definitively. Brett, it still is, does it astonish the people who ordered this attack that Saddam Hussein would be in such a place?
Yes. They were, according to a number of different sources, very surprised that this intelligence came around. They had been obviously getting a lot of pieces of intelligence, scraps of information from different sources on the ground. They're not getting into specifics, obviously, of what exactly transpired. Rita Cosby reported that the information came from a CIA person on the ground. But I can tell you that once it was discovered, the intelligence developed, the strike happened about an hour later. It was, one official called it calling 911. The bomber up above, hovering above in this close air support that had been activated just the day before, dropping these satellite-guided bombs, 2,000-pound bunker busters on this particular building.
Brett Baer. Brett, I know you, as soon as I let you go, you're going to get some more information, so I'll let you go now and return to Brad Baker, a former Army Ranger and Gulf War vet. Brad, is there some logic behind a delaying telling people what you've done? That is, the United States took quite a few hours to say, by the way, we hit this restaurant with these bombs, and you know, Saddam Hussein may have been in there. What's the advantage of that time delay between doing it and letting the world know you did it?
Well, I think that what they were doing is you go in, you do a mission, and then you need to go back and you need to assess that mission and assess the damage. And with the reporters being embedded and with the capabilities that we now have of talking to everybody, you can see how quickly something will come up, and then all of a sudden there'll be 500 questions. And I think the government right now is just going on, doing what they need to do, and they're moving forward. And I think they really wanted to know exactly what they had before they brought it to the media and let everybody know what was going on. To just say we bombed a
but wait a minute.
or,
Are you saying that they do know right now? I mean, they did tell us they bombed a target. They did tell us it was a leadership target, but they're unable to say at this moment, this is the official position, whether Saddam Hussein is in there and he's dead. Are you saying that because they have given 2/3 of the information, that they are certain of that last third?
I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is I think that they are still going through, they're still looking at everything, and they're going to have a complete and closed story before they give it to you, because there's too many assumptions right now. And I think that they're actually still working. You have operatives on the ground.
Sure. Talk about
Peter
the
was saying
operatives. I
earlier.
mean, this is your business. And we have heard over the last couple of days about the fact that we have operatives, perhaps several hundred, running around Baghdad looking for leadership targets, looking for Saddam Hussein, sitting on rooftops with laser designators to put a spot of light on a target that a laser bomb will follow in. I am still kind of amazed that we could have that many people in a place like Baghdad operating as freely as they are described to be operating.
Well, I think that you'd be amazed if you ever went and watched these people train. You're dealing with a very elite group of men who have trained. This is their life. And when I say this is their life, you have to understand this is what they do for a living. They didn't just come into the military and join for a couple years. I mean, these men have been in there for careers, and this is what they do for a living. This is what they train for every day. And actually, their training is pretty much, lack of a better word, on the job. I mean, they're always out there doing and doing their missions. The fact that they can move around, Peter alluded to it, you know, they work with people who are in other countries, and they blend in, they work at night, they have people who know the intelligence, know the layout, and are able to communicate. This is just a part of our military world that there's a reason why we don't talk too much about
Peter
it.
Brooks,
it's just great.
somebody, who's in there? Are these aren't blue-eyed Anglos, are they? And by the way, we're now seeing a live picture of what looks like a lot of smoke over Baghdad. It appears maybe a new firing, and I can hear the Al Jazeera or Abu Dhabi reporter in the background talking rather excitedly. So it appears that in that stand of date palms down there, there is some action. Simon Marks in Amman was going to add some information about the getaway to Syria or wherever for Saddam Hussein, but maybe he can give us some physical locators on what we're looking at here. Simon?
Let me just bring you up to date with what we're seeing and hearing from Abu Dhabi TV, John. They have reported that the Al Jazeera office in Baghdad has now been basically totaled in a bombing raid. At least one casualty has been seen being carried out of the office, seemingly severely injured. Now, Al Jazeera and Abu Dhabi TV's offices are very close by. In fact, a little bit earlier on, you may have seen the cameraman from Abu Dhabi TV kind of physically shaking after that blast. When we were in Baghdad, it was notable that Abu Dhabi TV, I think sensing that the United States intelligence agencies were taking a very close look through satellites at Baghdad, they started putting larger and larger signs on their building that read Abu Dhabi TV in a bid clearly to say to United States intelligence, look, we're press, don't target this area. Tonight, it would seem that they've certainly hit Al Jazeera's offices and possibly also damaged the offices of Abu Dhabi TV. Both networks still able to broadcast. The live broadcasts of Al Jazeera are coming out of the Palestine Hotel, which is on the eastern side of the Tigris River, which has not been the side of Baghdad that has been most dramatically affected by the action of over the past 24 hours. But the offices from which they were working on the western side of the city, close by the Ministry of Information, close by the Al Rashid Hotel. Reportedly now, the Al Jazeera office completely destroyed and at least one casualty that looks to our eyes from what we're seeing on Abu Dhabi television to be extremely serious. John?
Is there any reason, Simon, that you can think that the Americans would want to target Abu Dhabi or Al Jazeera? I mean, are there other ways to get the Iraqi Minister of Information off the air?
Well, I mean, taking out the Al Jazeera office in Baghdad will not inherently keep the Iraqi Minister of Information off the air. To keep the Minister of Information off the air, you need to keep him from going every day to that new sort of Ministry of Information facility that they've put together at the Palestine Hotel, because that's where he's showing up every day to brief those reporters who remain in the city. Look, getting the Minister of Information off the air, I don't think would be that difficult for US-led forces if they chose to do it, because we can presumably see him arriving from our spy satellites at the ministry, at the Palestine Hotel to give those briefings on a daily basis. I suspect that this explosion near Al Jazeera, in the Al Jazeera offices, I mean, this area is so compact, it's so tight. You've got the Ministry of Information right next door, you've got the Al Rashid right next door. This is now a battleground, and regardless, in a sense, of what you're doing in any of those buildings and what interests you represent, you run the risk of being a target if you're there. It's just not a safe place to be right now, John.
Yeah, by the way, I think the report from the Al Jazeera office, or maybe it's the Abu Dhabi office, is that people have been seen carrying a body out in a blanket, so perhaps the injury is more than serious. Simon, thanks a lot. Come back to you in a minute. Peter Brooks, you know, I started to ask you earlier, as Brad was talking about the special ops that move around Baghdad, have kept an eye on these leadership figures, have tapped into phone lines, have tapped into fiber optic phone lines that Saddam Hussein thought were super secure, have been watching him and his leaders for some time. Who are they? I can't imagine that they're blue-eyed Anglos. Who is it that the CIA has got in there?
Well, we're going to have people, I mean, John, you can also change somebody's appearance tremendously using disguise. I mean, if you look at me, I'm kind of blue-eyed and Caucasian, but if you change the color of my eyebrows, put glasses on me, put a fake mustache, and dress me in a certain manner, I can look very, very different. So these people who are going in there are area experts. They're going to have the language capability, and they're going to know the culture, but they're not going to do this alone. You're going to want to have a stable of agents who can get you access to the telephone switch. I mean, we just can't walk into Baghdad and get access to a telephone switch. I mean, we potentially could, but frankly, you have to be working in there for a while, develop some agents, and then you want to maybe have somebody that has the key to that telephone box so you can put the switch in there. You want to have somebody who's close to Saddam Hussein so you can monitor his movements. You're going to want to have people who can find out about the communication systems they're using. Are they using cell phones? Are they using encrypted cell phones? So there's a whole lot of stuff that goes into this, and it's really critical to point out here here, John, the importance of intelligence to military operations. This is absolutely critical. I mean, it's almost as important as what happens with your soldiers in the field. The intelligence allows them to be as successful, as effective, and as efficient as they are.
All right, now, is intelligence, are these agents going to be able to tell the CIA, the American government, Tommy Franks, everybody wants to know, you got him or you didn't?
Well, they may be able to, because there may be some people who have been in close proximity, but my sense is that when you have these large bombs coming in, people are going to have to leave the area. But you're going to want to send people back in there to find out what they can know. And remember, a lot of people are leaving Baghdad. You're going to want to turn some of those people around and send them back in to gather information for you. Remember the rescue of Private Lynch. Remember, there was a guy who saw her being slapped around, left, and volunteered information to American forces and went back 2 or 3 times to find out additional information. Saddam Hussein has a lot of enemies, and I think you're going to see a lot of people like that who are willing to help American forces and put their own lives at risk for the greater cause.
You know, Peter, as we're looking at these pictures of Saddam Hussein, and earlier we were seeing pictures of that A-10 tank buster, the Warthog, flying around the skies of Baghdad. And of course, we heard from Simon Marks about the explosions near the Al Jazeera television offices and the Abu Dhabi television offices. We're seeing on the wires that a major offensive and firefight is underway in downtown Baghdad at this hour, and that explains some of the smoke we're seeing and some of the shooting we're seeing, and it is underway as we speak. Meanwhile, we're looking at these pictures of Saddam Hussein, supposedly just a week or so ago, although a lot of people think that this tape was made some time ago because the clothing that people are wearing doesn't match the climate of just a few days ago. It's more like the climate of maybe a few weeks ago, and they're suspicious that that was not made on that day, although U.S. intelligence does think that these pictures we are looking at here are not doubles of Saddam Hussein, but are Saddam Hussein himself. And of course, the story of the evening is a certain building in the Al-Mansur district of Baghdad was targeted today. These are the pictures of the building and the wreckage of the building afterwards, essentially a large crater targeted by 4 2,000-pound JDAM bombs that came in, were dropped on this building by a B-1 bomber, a B-1, one of many planes that is essentially on the job 24 hours a day over Baghdad with forward air controllers and controllers on the ground looking for targets of opportunity, just like the one that was reportedly seen today. Reportedly, according to our Rita Cosby, U.S. intelligence agents on the ground saw Saddam Hussein go into this restaurant and was meeting with a dozen or 2 dozen of his security and leadership people. And the bombs were dropped on the building, and no one had seen Saddam Hussein leave, so there is a fair amount of optimism, although at this point no proof, but a fair amount of optimism on the part of U.S. officials that they might have gotten Saddam Hussein tonight. Actually, 3 p.m. Baghdad time, 7 a.m. yesterday morning, it being almost 1 a.m. East Coast time now. So there is this incredible possibility that Saddam Hussein was not only targeted, but possibility that he was taken out. And there is, of course, an investigation going on trying to figure out if they can confirm that in any way. I have Peter Brooks with me, a former CIA officer, talking about a variety of things. Peter, we tend to not want to be too optimistic about this. After all, on March 19th, the president got information that Saddam Hussein and his sons were in a certain bunker, and that bunker was hit and hit hard. And there is even the thought that Saddam Hussein was injured in that attack, but we're fairly certain now he was not killed. I've asked this question many times of other people through the evening. How are we going to know?
I don't know how many is many in this sense.
Well, Ms. Yaffe, what is next in this?
understand that Saddam Hussein will not rise from the grave and come and kill them and persecute them and torture them anymore. Don't we have to prove to them he's dead?
Well, I think that is important, but the fact is without his instruments of torture, without his instruments of repression, talking about the Special Republican Guard, the Internal Security Services, the Republican Guard, he is nothing. And that's what I'm trying to make the point here, is that as we reduce his military capability, as we deal with his paramilitary forces and remove them from the military calculus and as a danger to the Iraqi people, Saddam Hussein is only a man. And that way he cannot do it. Saddam Hussein, without those instruments, cannot make these people fearful any longer. So the fact is that it's great to know, would be great to know that he's dead. We may find him in that pile of rubble. Somebody may know for sure that he did die there. But the fact is that he's only a specter without his forces. And that's what we're doing. We're taking away that military capability day by day. Do you see what I mean?
Well, no, but Peter, is there an interest on the part of somebody to keep it a secret if Saddam Hussein is dead? Or if he's dead, jig's up, might as well admit it, we'll all make a deal with the Americans and end this, end them chasing us around with this incredible army they've come to visit upon us.
Well, we certainly would like to be able to proclaim his death, and we certainly would like to put the last nail in the coffin of this brutal dictatorship. But there still are people out there who may fight on, and so we cannot let down our guard at all. It's not all about him, John. In some ways, it's just like the war on terror. It's not all about Osama bin Laden. It's about taking out his soldiers who would commit acts of terror against the United States. So they are related, but I would say that one or the other is not the end of the problem. Taking out Saddam Hussein would be great. And it could allow people to finally say, let's let down our resistance here. But the fact is that if we don't have that information, we may not for some time. We have to continue to chip away at the facade of this regime by getting rid of the Fayadeen, Saddam, by getting rid of the Special Republican Guard and the Internal Security Services. And as you see, we're proceeding with that. You were talking about there are battles going on right now in Baghdad. We're not letting down our guard. We're going to keep pressing on, and we're going to continue to monitor the situation to see if Saddam Hussein is around.
Brad Baker, we'd like to know that Saddam Hussein was dead for the good of the Iraqi people. We've seen in places like Basra, where they are fairly certain he's not going to bother them anytime soon, how people have suddenly begun to welcome the British troops. We've seen that in Al-Najaf, we've seen it in Nasiriyah and other places where there's been bitter fighting until the people think that the United States has the upper hand and can protect them from Saddam. What about U.S. soldiers? You served in the Gulf War. You chased him out of Kuwait. I think the United States Army for some time has had a plan to do just what is going on now. They felt that it was going to be necessary someday. What is it going to mean to American troops to learn Saddam's done?
Well, I think that that'll be a huge psychological victory for the troops to know that not only have they made history in so many ways in this war, but to know that they also, if in fact they do find this out, to know that they ended him. But I think that we need to really concentrate on one of the things that Peter said is that you have two different areas. You have Saddam and then you have his loyalists. And taking one out doesn't guarantee that everything's going to be all right. Even if Saddam, even if you can show that he has died, you're still going to have the loyalists, and you're still going to have the small fractions that we're going to have to deal with. And you have to right now not focus on Saddam. You have to focus on the missions at hand, and you need to keep driving on and think that Saddam is still there until you can wipe out these fractions.
Okay, Brad. Simon Marks in Amman, before I run out of time, a last observation from you, please.
Well, I suppose, John, the last observation that it's just absolutely extraordinary to me that Saddam Hussein would risk meeting with his family members and his top advisors in this area of Baghdad, reportedly, as Rita was telling us earlier, to have a conversation about perhaps fleeing to Syria this late in the day with American tanks and American troops just half a mile away. I mean, it's just an extraordinary indication of yet another miscalculation, perhaps a fatal miscalculation by Saddam Hussein. John?
All right, Simon, thank you. We're Simon, before I leave you, we're still looking at Baghdad here, and there's information on the wires that just out of the frame of this shot, essentially, we have a full-on firefight going on. Isn't that it? I mean, that is past the doorstep of Baghdad. That's in the door.
Well, it's certainly a very important area of the city for U.S. forces to try and capture. I mean, if you can take the presidential palace that they're in now, we also gather that there's some movement by a couple of American tanks, perhaps trying to return to the other presidential palace from which Greg Kelly broadcast earlier.
We're out of time. Let me say goodbye to Simon Marks, Brad Baker, and Peter Brooks. I'm John Gibson. When we return, coverage of Operation Iraqi Freedom will continue with Lori Dew and Brian Wilson. Stand by.
Participate forward.
Pretty lethal, but it's possible Saddam dug deep enough. He actually was attacked, and we had the right place for him. We hit the bomb at the right place, and he still survived because he was well protected. So there are a lot of questions still to be answered.
Yeah, you know what that means at the end of the day, no matter how much the city gives up, there are going to have to be some rangers and some guys who are going to have to go down underground and go from bunker to bunker and warren to warren just to make sure.
Absolutely, and we also have to see what kind of chatter we pick up. Are the Iraqis trying to recover from the loss of their top leader? Are they therefore a little more careless in the kind of communications they use? Can we hear some of that in our spy satellites and so forth? So those are the other kinds of things you try to do. But as you point out, there's nothing like getting the evidence directly, and I'm sure we'll try to do that. Maybe one of these armed reconnaissance raids is going to go in that vicinity in the next day or two.
Michael O'Hanlon at the Brookings Institution. Always good to talk to you, Michael. Thank you for your insight.
My pleasure, Forrest.
And as we have said, and as we will be following through the day and through the evening, Saddam Hussein may possibly be dead. We'll have more on that.
Target Iraq, the battle for Baghdad. This is a special edition of the news with Brian Williams on CNBC. Substituting tonight, Forrest Sawyer.
Well, let me just set the stage for you as the sun rises, 7 o'clock in the morning in Baghdad. This is a shot that you have seen many, many times. This is a mosque off to the left, and this is where we have seen some bomb strikes through the evening. This is what we know about the attack on Saddam Hussein. It took place at 2 o'clock in the afternoon yesterday. It's about 16 hours ago, or a little bit more than that actually now. That would be 6 a.m. Eastern time. It was believed that there were intelligence operatives meeting in the Al-Mansour district at a bunker that they had been watching for a period of time. Intelligence source or sources told them that Saddam Hussein and his two sons may indeed be there. According to Miklashevsky, Jim Miklashevsky, our Pentagon correspondent, they were actually spotted going into the bunker. 4 2,000-pound JDAM GBU-31 bunker buster bombs were dropped in, one after another, each one digging a little bit deeper. So it is believed that if Saddam Hussein were sitting in a bunker right in that area, he's probably dead right now. But we have learned that there is a whole trail of these pathways and bunkers underneath, and Saddam could have passed out that way. He could have left a little earlier. So there are questions. Is Saddam dead? Is he alive? Andrea Mitchell, our chief foreign affairs correspondent, has been reporting the story throughout the evening. And I suppose the only way they're going to find this out, really, is just to continue to sort through it, Andrea.
And it is conceivable, Forrest, that if this were a hit and Saddam Hussein were killed in this hit, that we might never know, because they may never have the evidence. The devastation from these bunker buster bombs is so incredible that it is possible that they would never find hard evidence other than circumstantial evidence by his absence, by the lack of communication from him, by other communications from people around him to actually prove for all time that Saddam Hussein were dead. But we are leaping several steps here. We should point out that we don't have absolute evidence from our sources, at least. The United States government does not have evidence that he actually was attending the meeting when the bomb hit. And if he were, that he was killed or survived is something that we cannot know.
And what they're doing right now, obviously, is they're watching for electronic chatter. They've got human intelligence on the ground that's trying to sort this out. They've got special forces and CIA operatives that are right in the region that are looking at the bomb damage and doing a lot of talking. And I am sure that they're going to watch very carefully to see if this regime is able to hold up even in the frail state that it's already in.
Exactly. Now, we know that he has extensive tunneling under Baghdad, and one of the things that they've been doing incrementally over the last few days is to hit at a number of the escape routes, especially the route to the north, to Tikrit, his family home, so that he could not have that escape. But it's impossible to say whether they've closed off all avenues of escape for Saddam Hussein. He has survived so many of these attacks in the past. And that said, whether or not they would be able to establish through others within the regime that he was in fact at that meeting and in fact had been killed.
The question, of course, is how long this is all going to take and how much churning this is going to have to go through and what impact it will have on the region.
Well, first of all, I talked to Bill Arkin, our military analyst, a few minutes ago, and one of his top sources said, because it's going to take a long time to sort this out. Unfortunately, I don't work for that guy, so I can't go to bed, but that's basically the time frame we're in. They have to find more evidence on the ground and, as I say, listen in on the chatter to see whether or not there's virtual mayhem with the regime reacting to their own sure knowledge of where Saddam Hussein was.
Well, if you're Saddam Hussein and you're still alive, you're certainly looking over your shoulder.
Exactly.
Andrea Mitchell, Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent. Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you, Forrest.
And retired Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Rick Francona is weathering through the evening with us. He, of course, has worked with and studied the Iraqis back in the day, as they say, a CNBC military analyst with us right now. Now, one of the things we've been, in our own uninformed way, saying is that we believe that the regime would begin to really, really crack more than it is now if Saddam were dead, and people would know he was dead.
Sure.
Around him.
Oh, absolutely. I think that, he's the glue that's been holding together. And it's not cohesive now. It's very, very fragile. And
he's it, right?
He's it. If he goes, the regime would fall apart. There is no one waiting in the wings to step in. I know they have a constitutional chain of command. Izzat Ibrahim Aduri can't do it. Qusay, being groomed as the heir apparent, I don't think he's got the backing of the proper, of all the forces he would need.
Let's just walk through that.
All right.
Ibrahim has been given the control of the north, and it is said that he has been up there in Mosul directing the fighting over there. And he is constitutionally the #2 guy, but you're saying that he just doesn't have the power.
Okay, he's an Aduri. That's his tribe. That's his clan. They're from Mosul. That's his tribal homeland. That's a source of his strength up there. He's got real backing up there in the north. He's not a Baghdadi. I don't think he would be accepted by the run-of-the-mill population if they were to get a vote.
All right, how about Qusay? Qusay has been directing, it is said, the Republican Guard and the Special Republican Guard in the resistance.
Right. He basically has all the command of what remains of Iraqi military power in his control. But he doesn't have the charismatic leadership that his father has, and I don't think that the people that he would need to follow him will do so.
So what do you think, and you've dealt with them, you know them, what do you think the people around Saddam would do if he were dead?
I think they would probably try and find a way out very quickly.
So you think that they would start trying to communicate to the U.S. or do something?
Or run. I think they'd try and make their own escape. I don't think they're willing to risk communicating with the United States because they're all on the list of people they're probably going to try for war crimes.
Some 50-odd people that they're going to try for war crimes.
The fabulous 40 or whatever they're calling it.
So they got to get out of there.
Right.
That means that underneath them, every single commander all the way down is going to see these guys heading for the hills.
And they'll make the contact with the United States. Because
these are people that the U.S. has been dealing with all along, right? Sending them emails, making telephone calls.
These are the people that have been targeted. That level, kind of the colonel, brigadier level, are the ones that have been targeted by this whole campaign to lay down their arms. You surrender the unit, because that's the level can actually make a unit surrender. And they're the ones that are going to be the future of Iraq. They're not on the war crimes list, and they don't want to be on the war crimes list.
Now, haven't we already seen some of that? There's a lot of really interesting stuff that's happening. We are hearing that up in the north, there are some forces that are refusing to come down to Baghdad as reinforcements or cannon fodder. We are hearing that there have been troops between Kuwait and Baghdad. that did not attack when they could have.
Well, I think that's a key point to the plan. And, you know, we went over the plan in great detail. And, of course, we didn't know the plan, so we were trying to put it together from the outside.
But we can sure talk about it.
Well, it looks like, to me, that maybe these contacts have been successful all along. And the Central Command knew, as they were going up there, who was not going to fight. That's why they felt they could do it with the force structure they had in place.
Sure, but I mean that was the assumption. It was this Fedayeen Saddam that kind of threw a wrench in the works, because a bunch of guys in Nissans who knew.
Right.
But it does indicate that they have been very effective all along the way in contacting these people at the level that you're saying.
That's right, and I think they've been much more successful than we know right now.
And you know why I'm walking around this is because I'm looking for what should we look for to tell us whether Saddam is still alive or not in the next 2 or 3 days.
Well, I think, you know, as we've been talking, I think our best sources are going to be electronic intelligence and just observation by our forces on the ground of who's doing what, who's moving. Because if Saddam is truly dead, this is going to unravel so quickly.
Let's bring in Waleed Fares, who's at Florida Atlantic University in Boynton Beach, Florida, with us right now. How much of what we're saying do you disagree with, Waleed?
I agree with everything Rick said.
It's a love fest.
But let me add a couple of stuff from the other side. There are peculiar things happening right now in the last 2 hours, and I'm sure we will get more information from it. Since the last time the palaces were shelled, the Arab media, which is in Baghdad, would get the American reports, broadcast that, and then get confirmation from the Ministry of Information or from other Iraqi sources, which means that there is a chain of command. Till at least the last 30 minutes, most of those networks, including Al Jazeera, LBCI, Abu Dhabi, and other networks, are only broadcasting American reports.
So what do you make of that?
Well, chain of command broken at this point, or they don't have information. Where is Mr. As-Sahaf? He has been so vocal for the last 24 hours. That's a major question. So there is something going on out there. We don't have the confirmation, but that's an indication.
Well, I mean, we know that they dropped 4 bunker busters in on some intelligence operatives, and they were probably pretty high levels. So we know that they got some dead folks. We just don't know if Saddam's one of them.
It's more than that. Usually, I mean, over the past week or 10 days, despite all the shelling, there will be always somebody from the Ministry of Information, including Mr. Sahaf himself, who would come and blast us immediately, and sometimes during the shelling. This time he's absent, and the absence is too long. I mean, few hours after such an attack. I'm not saying this is the evidence. I'm saying this is a peculiar situation.
Yeah, shouldn't Sahaf, Rick, be saying, you know, this is a great Iraqi victory at this point?
Well, of course, but I mean, they don't. I mean, they may not know what happened yet. I mean, they still may be digging.
Oh no, this happened
16 hours ago.
Yeah, a long time ago. So they know that they.
Well, if Saddam hasn't shown up at work, yeah, they probably know he's not there. Yeah, I'm surprised at the absence of Sahaf, because he has been out there. I mean, it's almost been, you know,
this is yesterday
tragic.
It happened, right? So,
yeah.
So you would think that if they had tried to get Saddam, I'm speculating wildly, but if they had tried to get Saddam and he were still alive, they would do a little thumb your nose trick here.
Or we'd see another tape or a statement would be released. We haven't seen anything. So,
on the other hand, Waleed, you know, the communications have been so bad, and it has become so disrupted at this point that it might not signify anything.
Well, I don't think so. At some level, the Iraqi regime will always send signs of life. And as Rick said, this is a regime centered around a person. They don't have the know-how as to how to act without Saddam Hussein. Every single detail in Iraq, when it comes to security, when it comes to confronting the enemy, is regulated at some point by Saddam, by somebody who has the power of Saddam. The feeling, and you know, in political science we can't talk about feelings, but the feeling today is that there is a void. It doesn't mean that the man is dead necessarily. We need to wait. But there is something unusual that has happened over the past 10 hours at least.
Well, you tend to watch the region's media. What will you expect to see there?
Oh, immediately I would expect Al Jazeera, LBCI, Abu Dhabi, the other networks to immediately broadcast something like a source from the Iraqi Information Ministry told us that everything is under control. Minister Al-Sahaf will be with us momentarily, as was the case for the last 1 week. So far, till the last 30 minutes, and I may be wrong, but till the last 30 minutes, nothing has happened yet.
And are they reporting what the U.S. is saying?
They're saying, according to U.S. reports, this is what's happening. So we will have to wait. I mean, the next few hours on the media level will tell us a lot. Of course, our intelligence services will have to confirm that, and as Rick said, it will take some time.
Waleed, has Iraqi TV said anything at all?
No, we don't have anything from Iraqi TV so far. So far.
So we are left with questions in the air. And
yes, absolutely. Well, I still maintain my theory that the bodyguards, those who died, and their families will be the first ones to let us know that something of that magnitude has happened. The second will be the people...
And how will the bodyguards tell us? I mean, they're going to come out with a white flag or what?
No, actually, their families are going to start making phone calls. Where's my son? Where's my brother? And that's how it will start usually.
And the NSA will monitor that?
Yes.
Okay. Walid Ferez at Florida Atlantic University and Rick Francona, thank you both. You're welcome. We'll be back in just a moment.
American troops to come later in the infantry, American infantry, to follow.
Again, this is a CNN translator translating Abu Dhabi television.
They're advancing through southeast of Baghdad for American troops.
يعني هذا المحيط الذي نتحدث عنه أيمن منذ الصباح
This area that we're talking about since early morning, the presidential complex,
نعم ويبدو أن ما حوله تقريبا
we think that what the surrounding area is nearly completely destroyed. This area has been targeted since yesterday. Yesterday, Rashid Hotel, they attempted to enter. We were there. Today, early morning, they attempted again to enter the area. It seems that this area is having priority and is targeted from the British and American troops, but the Iraqis have repelled the attack and in general. And the troops were not able to have control over this area. As far as nobody knows who were in these buildings, but later, once things are calmer, we will try to find out.
When things are calmer. Just imagine for a moment, this is a picture that is literally being seen across much of the world right now. It is one of those moments where news channels around the world, everybody is watching, many people are watching exactly the same thing.
We don't know if it's an Iraqi tank or an American tank. We also are hearing artillery from a tank.
No.
You can hear the sound.
U.S. for dropping those bombs in there, but the officials felt like it was important enough, they were sure enough that he was there, that they went for it, and I am told that there are two rather large craters, and you've seen the pictures of that, rather large craters from those bombs going in, and it may be days, if ever, that before they can figure out exactly who was in there. But that's one of the first things that they will try to do. It is so important because this is the reason for us that the very first night of the war they tried to take down Saddam Hussein. They had reasonably good intelligence that he was in that compound with his sons. They dropped the bombs on it. They didn't get him. But the logic was if you could take Saddam Hussein down in the beginning, you may not have to go to war. The leadership would be gone. They've had this, what they call, it's sort of like an octopus theory, that if you take the head off, the tentacles will die. This is what they're trying to do now. If you can take him down, the tentacles will shrink, the fighting will stop, the civilian casualties will be minimized, not increased, and if you have to do a little sacrificing to get there, then I think that's what they were trying to do.
You know, Carl, I'll tell you one of the questions that's hanging in the air right now, and it really goes back to the same attack when they had back in March 19th. There was a lag time between the time they were told about it and the time that they actually dropped the bomb. And I wonder how much time there was between those two things on this occasion.
Not sure exactly. I think that they rolled in as quickly as they could. We do know that because of something that the Air Force rolled into early this week called urban CAS, or urban close air support, if you will, they are keeping a variety of bombing packages in the air 24/7 over Iraq, particularly over the Baghdad area. They are having airborne forward air controllers up to select targets and separate the good guys from the bad guys. And so I suspect it was very quickly. No one will give you that level of detail. They don't want you to know how quickly they can roll in and take a target down. But I would suggest that it probably wasn't terribly long after they confirmed and were able to get. But these things require permissions, you know. You can't just go in and take a strike in a residential area. It had to have gone back up the command structure to someone in the intelligence community who said, yes, we are satisfied, this source is reliable. It went through. It may have even gone through the White House. I don't know whether it went through the White House or not, but it certainly went through the command structure to say, this is where we believe he is. Let's put bombs on it. The bombs were called in. They were dropped on the target. It may have been a few minutes to a few hours between the two, but there's not a lot of movement around the city. It's not easy to move around the city right now because they're looking, and they had been looking at that area for some time with these overhead, the Predators, the small unmanned vehicles that have been flying over the area, the U-2s, and they had, I wouldn't say boots on the ground. They're not boots on the ground. They're not soldiers. Some of them are special forces. Some of them are intel operatives. There are a number of people who have been keeping their eyes open for Saddam Hussein for a long time, and the word has been out for a long time. If we see him, we're going to try to take him out. And they saw him. They were convinced that that's where he was, and that's exactly what they try to do for us.
And that is, of course, Carl Rochelle at the Pentagon. Thank you, sir. Let us talk a little more about this in about.
Which was targeted by heavy bombing. A missile hit the building, and we'll have the images talk for themselves and speak for themselves.
You could see fire in at least 2 floors of that building, with a pretty good fire burning on the top floor of the building. In this exchange of gunfire that came either from the building or from the area of the building at American tanks some distance away. And in the view of the correspondent for Abu Dhabi TV, and it's only that, the Iraqis have successfully defended this position that they were trying to defend. Which may or may not be true. But that's the view that the correspondent has of this moment. And that fire does seem to be getting bigger, doesn't it, on the top floor of the building. There was, back 5 minutes or so ago, maybe a little longer now, large bursts of tank fire at that building, particularly on the left side of that building, as you look at the screen.
يبدو أن في لحظة سكوننا كي نترك الصورة تعبر.
We're having these images speak for themselves.
However, having said that, we would like to see as broad a coalition as possible to help us reconstruct Iraq and launch Iraq towards a path of democracy and peace. I would like to see a UN role, but a role that will be well defined, clearly defined, and not in a leadership role, a role in partnership with the people of Iraq, the representatives of the people of Iraq, and the coalition that has come to help the people of Iraq overcome tyranny.
Prime Minister, I have an old friend of yours who is with us and working with us. It is Rick Francona, former Air Force Lieutenant Colonel, and would like to ask you a question.
It's nice to see you again, Warren.
Nice to see you.
I am curious. I'm judging from what you're saying that you're guaranteeing that the Kurdish people will agree to the territorial integrity of Iraq, but are you going to push for a Kurdish autonomous region?
We already have more than
table for what comes next, and that's what I'm focused on this week, because I think as pivotal as this question of whether Saddam is alive or not, as pivotal as that is this question of who is going to run the reconstruction. So this meeting today in Northern Ireland between President Bush and Prime Minister Blair was absolutely critical to the future of the entire region, because we don't know what happened. The reporting out of it's pretty slim, but whether they go with the United States as the lead in the reconstruction or the United Nations is a central question.
Do you believe there is a question there? Because certainly if you listen to many of our leaders within the United States, they are saying that they are going to take the role at least for 6 months or so. You heard Deputy Defense Secretary Paul Wolfowitz yesterday in all the Sunday morning talk shows saying that.
Well, clearly in the short run, in terms of the security issues, until the country moves into sort of a provisional situation, the United States is going to be in charge. But Tony Blair has some cards to play here. He was a very stalwart ally, and he has some good arguments on his side as to why it might make more sense for the safety of British and American troops if this was done under the cover of the United Nations. If you think about what would be a more likely target for jihadists, and we now know that there are these jihadists from all over the Arab world who are in Iraq, would it be a United Nations barrack or an American barracks? Clearly the Americans would be more of a target. So there are some arguments.
Get out, in other words, pretty quickly. We wouldn't want to have a strong United States presence there too long.
No, we wouldn't, or we would be sitting ducks, because there will be a period of jubilation after we've liberated the Iraqi people from this awful dictator, but then pretty quickly you get those nationalist impulses that come back. You combine that with the jihadists, and there's a pretty good argument to be made that whoever is actually running this recovery, we want it to at least seem and to present to the world that it's under the cover of the United Nations.
And to that end, this building right here, the planning ministry, it is considerably ablaze, everyone. You can see it there in the middle of your screen. This was the target of a U.S. airstrike, U.S.-led airstrike. One would presume it was a U.S. plane that dropped a significant bomb right here. I believe that Ahmed Al-Hayadari, you have been watching this as well. I want to bring you back into this conversation. Your thoughts here, particularly on what you're seeing on our screen.
Well, it's interesting, the comments that I just heard. I think, while yes, forensic evidence will be important proof on whether it was Saddam or not, but I think the other thing that we shouldn't forget is the onus now will be on the regime, if they truly exist, to prove that they do by either appearing on TV or some sort of broadcast. And if they don't over the next, I'd say, 12 hours, then that is proof in itself that they're no longer there. On the second item, on the reconstruction, I fully agree that the next big thing, this is now where the work has to start. But what's important is not whether the Americans and the Brits, and I really hope the French don't even show up to this whole thing. But the important thing is to show that the plans will be in place and what the plans are, and show Iraqi faces that will. Iraq is not in Afghanistan. Iraq has a very high-educated infrastructure and human resources that are ready to go right now. There are significant plans that I and many others have been working on over a year, and so to get Iraq into prosperity. That it's now the time to show the Iraqi people that yes, the wheels will be in motion. There has to be a demonstration, whether it's just the American and Brits or somebody else. It's the plans that will prove it to the Iraqi people, and not who is behind it.
Ahmed, Newsweek columnist Jonathan Alter, who's here with me, he wants to ask you a question as well.